state of California. Speaking of growth, the IMF put out their assessments showing the growth of the economy in the state of California. You could see other competing economies, United States, China. You can see the 6% output in the state of California last year. We simply have no peers. No longer the 5th largest economy in the world or the 4th largest economy in the world. With some humility, let me suggest that if India continues on their pace, we may go back to our original form. But nonetheless, California's $4.1 trillion a year output places us as the 4th largest economy in the world. That said, we don't live in Plato's Republic. California is under assault. The United States of America, in many respects, is under assault because we have a president that's been reckless in terms of assaulting those growth engines. Has created a climate of deep uncertainty and certainly has California in his sights. You can see just from this headline alone, New York Times, dozens and dozens of headlines as it relates to an assault on research, an assault on science, from NIH grants to cuts in libraries and knowledge and literacy, crime dollars, volunteering, the spirit that defines the best of America and Vista in 1965, and Sarge Shriver, the great frontier, and that assault on AmeriCorps, $400 million just whacked under the guise of quote-unquote efficiency. By the way, our AmeriCorps members working on the recovery in Los Angeles, our AmeriCorps members working on high-dose tutoring in our public schools. Best to describe this as the Trump slump all across the United States. It's reflected in adjustments by every independent economist, by leading banks, by institutions. Across the board, we are projecting impacts because of the uncertainty that have led to a downgrade in our projections. And I'll get to the budget very briefly. Those downgrades include the disproportionate impacts in a state like California, the impacts on the ports, impacts that have been highlighted and reinforced by port directors in Long Beach and LA, certainly where 40% of goods movement comes through, but also in the smaller ports like San Francisco and Oakland. You've heard Gene Soroka and others lament about a 35% decline in volume. We've gone from 145% tariffs to maybe 80% and now 30. If you started at 30, it would have a jaw-dropping impact on the economic future of this state. And I bring up the 145, the 80, now 30, but to highlight the impacts that are disproportionate in California, not just as it relates to the trade with China, but relationship and trade to Mexico and Canada. When you look at those three trading partners, imports and exports into the state of California, you can see the numeric $67 billion, 37% of that related to exports into those countries of our total exports, and 41% of our imports reflected in that trade between those three countries. The impact, of course, of the swings, the volatility, the uncertainty across the spectrum is it's chilled investment. Market swings, you can see just last month, feels like a year ago, it was just literally weeks ago, a $10 trillion swing in the markets. The markets may be up yesterday, down today. We'll see where they are tomorrow. That uncertainty is leading to uncertainty as it relates to business decisions and investments. You can see the impacts on the largest retailers and expectation that small businesses have laid, that their decisions that need to be made today as it relates to backpacks and school supplies and decisions that will be made in just a matter of months as it relates to Christmas supplies might be impacted by the indecision or the uncertainty, both and, coming from the White House. 30% tariff, 25% tariff, 10% tariffs, even as baselines, having a profound impact. But more importantly, the impact is disproportionate on our small businesses. And I say that as a guy who knows a thing or two about it. You don't have to impress upon me what P&L is, or seasonal purchasing. I am proud to have started a small business right out of college with a part-time employee, Pat Kelly, and grew that at peak to over 1,000 employees, 21 businesses. And I don't say that to impress any of you, but to impress upon you my passion for entrepreneurialism, my passion for people who put everything on the line for riches and new beginnings, small business men and women, and the anxiety, even in the best of times, that they feel. But how about the anxiety at the moment? Do I make the purchase in China with 30%, or will he change his mind in 2 weeks and it will be 20%? Do I hold back and just do my high margin purchases today and forget the low margin purchases? But what will that do in terms of my summer volume and revenue? Across the spectrum, the impacts are just being felt and haven't yet fully been felt. And you can point to the inflation number and say, well, it's behind us now, please. The impacts of these tariffs have yet to be felt. The impacts, however, are being felt disproportionately in the fourth largest economy in the world that has so much goods volume and trade. And I'll remind you, not just so much goods volume and trade, 1 out of every 5 businesses in Southern California are directly or indirectly connected to that trade. So the impacts here are disproportionate. I talked about California as it relates to its dominance in so many different sectors. Another area of dominance as it relates to business starts. You can see here in the state of California since 2019 through September of last year, and the most modern, at least up-to-date numbers that we have, 1.16 billion new business starts, 2x. Texas businesses remain the backbone of our economy. 4.2 million businesses in the state of California, 7 million people employed. It's about 47.1% of our total employment. It's a point of pride, and the impact our small businesses are feeling is disproportionate. We are, as a consequence, pushing back. And we're not just standing by passively. We feel we have agency. We can shape the future. We can punch above our weight. And that's why, working with the legislature, we were proud to do an early action on a special session that fortified the Department of Justice, our AG's office, to provide additional resources so that we can move aggressively to defend our values and defend the state of California, defend our Constitution as it relates to issues large and small, from birthright citizenship to voting issues, obviously issues that are more contemporary along the lines I just suggested on the AmeriCorps cuts, and notably on the issue of tariffs. On the issue of tourism, I should note, California dominates. We were $157.3 billion last year in total spend, which was record-breaking tourism just last year. The impacts of our trade, not just our tariffs, the impacts of rhetoric related to the world we're living in, the recklessness of that rhetoric in relationship to the trade and confidence, let alone trust in brand America, is, yes, unfortunately impacting America's #1 tourism destination, the state of California. Here's the latest numbers that came from Visit California: 11% decline in total volume of international visitors. You can see highlighted here Germany leading the decline, and obviously UK and Canada. I bring those three up because we haven't been passive in this respect either. We've been recently meeting with leaders in Germany. Up there, one of the slides with the German ambassador recently, the UK ambassador we met with consul generals all across the state of California representing Mexico, and the lower screen there with the Premier of British Columbia. We have been proactive in our engagement, proactive in making the point that California has an open hand, not a closed fist. That we are 2,000 miles away from Washington, D.C. We're 1 million miles away in terms of mindset in our approach. By the way, our mindset included a $5.2 million investment working with Visit California to invest in getting tourists back into California from Canada in particular. 1.8 million Canadians visited California last year. So we're trying to protect our economic power. Again, suing the Trump administration among many other critical issues. This lawsuit, though, being emphasized as the most important. You may have seen yesterday, we were able to provide the kind of specificity that was required of a request for an injunction that will be not only included today in the presentation that I'm about to make on the budget and its impacts as it relates to what's going on in Washington, D.C., on our revenue in particular, but also as it relates to the lawsuit itself that was filed that uses a lot of the data that we're providing you today in this budget presentation to back up that lawsuit. So let's jump right into the budget. When we last met in this room, we estimated we said it was in essence a balanced budget, $363 million. That was the estimate in the January presentation, all things being equal. Interestingly, since January, the presentation that I provided you had a revenue projection, and we were off. We were significantly off. The revenue that came in from January through April exceeded our expectation by $7.9 billion. The economy of California was humming. An additional $7.9 billion above our projections we were collecting. That has significantly changed since the actions of this administration. We now project on the basis of the work that's been done by not only our finance team, but those experts that we counsel and engage in an independent review of our estimates. We estimate that the impacts that I just laid out as it relates to what's going on in Washington, D.C., instead of seeing that increase in revenue through April that we were experiencing, again, $7.9 billion above, we're going to see an impact about a $16 billion downturn, not all in the next fiscal year, but fiscal year plus one. This goes into basically a 2-year process. Let's break it down so you can see where those dollars will decline. Unsurprisingly, anyone's familiar with the state of California's budget and the volatility of the budget, reduction in capital gains being the most impacted. You'll see a $10 billion estimate in reduction in capital gains, and I'll give you some proof points of that in just a moment. You can see the impacts on income as it relates to wages, then the $3.5 billion in that space, income taxes, and then weaker corporate profits that will nerd about $2.5 billion less in expected revenue. This is, again, top line, $16 billion revenue decline based upon where we thought we'd be just in January. So here's a slide I showed you in the January budget. And this is an important slide because I highlighted that we were getting back. And again, anyone familiar with California's budget, because of the progressive nature of our tax system, understands the volatility, understands the nature of the EKG chart that is here. And what we were basically trying to highlight in January is getting back to some normalcy. A sort of more traditional 5.1% on capital gains as a percentage of personal income. And that's the numeric that has a disproportionate impact, not only on our revenue, but also impacts that are external from us related to the markets themselves and how the markets have an outsized role in terms of impacting our capital gains. So we projected about a 5.6% numeric in January. Today, we're projecting a 4.4%, from 5.6% down to 4.4%. The out years, you saw on the last chart, 5.1. We're projecting that now down to 4.8 in the plus year budget. So that alone has a significant impact on our revenue and relates to the chart that I previously provided you, 10 billion of the 16 billion being impacted by capital gains. Here's just that chart that we often share, just showing you that revenue volatility. This is more broad than just capital gains, just showing you these peaks and valleys. And that, again, only reinforces the imperative of getting to 20%, not a 10% reserve, and making sure that the GAN limit is not included in the BSA and works against us. That's an ongoing reform that we need to pursue, and we need the voters to approve. So let's talk about the budget. Here we are, $321.9 billion budget, submitting to the legislature, $226.4 billion as general fund. We $15.7 billion in total reserves, and a shortfall that we're projecting on the revenue and expense side of $11.9 billion. I want to put that in perspective, that shortfall in perspective. It's about 5.8% of the general fund. You can put it in perspective of previous years, significantly higher, going back to the Great Recession, another recession. You could see some of the numbers that previous governors have had to grapple with. So by relative years, this is pretty mild. And as a consequence, we are moving forward with